Okay, we are rolling, and I'm very nervous. I'm sorry for everyone if I mess up anything or anything else, because this is my first video and I'm very nervous and anxious, and I'm socially not that good at talking to. So I don't know if it's gonna turn out good or not. Even if it's not, I'm gonna post it, since I'm not gonna do barely any editing on this. I'm sorry on everything. So let's get this started, shall we? Hi, I am an artist, a digital artist to be exact. I work as a freelance artist. I've been working for a while now, and here I'm gonna show you what my process is when I draw. What do you mean by process? It's not a tutorial or anything else. It's basically how my workflow is and what kind of steps I follow when I draw, and what kind of thinking pattern I usually do, because every artist has a different workflow. Some things work for them, some things doesn't. So I'm going to talk about what works for me and what I usually don't do. I'm not going to talk about what I don't do. I'm only going to talk about what I do. Anything else what I don't talk about is what I don't do. I have a lot of room for improvements, and I'm looking to improve myself every day. So for the first thing I do is I draw a blob. And this blob making feels really comforting, because it's basically a process where whatever that thing I'm going to draw, I draw in the thing, the shape of it, and not focus on the details too much. I don't focus on the anatomy, I don't focus on the proportions or anything else. I just focus on the shape structure, because honestly, a good shape can fix even bad proportion artists. Like, you can see a lot of examples that the proportions doesn't match, the anatomy doesn't match, but still it looks good because it has appealing shapes. So as soon as you can master the uses of the blob, you can basically improve your art a lot more faster, I noticed. And in this blob process, what I do is I basically stack up shapes after shapes, layers after layers, until I'm happy with the blob that works for me, that I want to do my rough sketch on. And speaking of rough sketch, this is the second part of what I do. A rough sketch is very easy. It's just that detailing the blob and then making sure all the things that I want the character or anything that I'm drawing to have, that I have the proportions correct, I have the character design correct, I have the anatomy correct. Anything else that may seem it's not in the blob, and it's between the line art phase and it's the blob phase. And when I do the line art, I just basically follow the shapes and the details of the rough sketch. So the only thing when I focus on the line art is the precision of the line art, the line depth, and not anything else. Because when I realized that if I focus too much on the proportions and other stuff during the line art process, I lose track of everything else. The line art itself loses its quality. And by the way, make sure to flip your canvases quite often, as during the blob and rough sketch phase, because that really helps to find out the details. And don't be ashamed to use all the symmetry tools and anything else, or the rulers necessary if you want to draw, because you have these tools at your disposal. There's nothing wrong to use it. It's actually good thing if you learn how to use it. You can maximize the efficiency of your art. And speaking of which, let's go to the line art. When I do the line art, it's very simple. I like using thick lines. I like them thick, and I use thick lines because that kind of thing is appealing to me. You do you, but when I do draw, I feel like I want my line art to be a critical part of the drawing, even if I color it or not. And I try to use confident lines. I try to make my lines consistent, and I really, really love to use line depth. And sometimes I use consistent lines, sometimes use line depth. You need to be careful on where to use what. A trick I use is when my liner is thick, it just means that whatever if I'm drawing a hand of a character just really thick, that means the hand is closer. If I'm drawing something which is a bit thinner, that means the character or anything else is further away. And that's kind of the rule of thumb I use. But sometimes, for the sake of stylization, that things can change. And speaking of which, let's go to the next page, which is coloring. And for coloring, I see a lot of people make a lot of mistakes, I guess. At least to me, they're not the best colors, because I'll see a lot of beginner artists use vibrant colors and very dark shadows and stuff like that. Sometimes they use black for shading, which I highly don't recommend. Well, speaking of which, for my rule of thumb of making sure you have a right color or right kind of color is making sure the color range is a bit muted, or to you, if you draw too much with vibrant and bright colors, if you can pull that off, I'm not saying it's not a wrong thing. A lot of artists I love because they draw with vibrant colors, but a lot of beginner artists like draw too much with vibrant colors, they don't know how to play with it. If you know, it's fine. If you feel like you are lacks something, if you don't know how to pick colors, you can basically use the rule of thumb to pick colors, like using in the middle section of the color graph, and try not to use anything that's too dark or too bright or too saturated. Make sure it's somewhere in the middle. And a basic good way of practicing is find out your favorite artists are and then color pick the base color of them. Do not use that for the shading, because that kind of hurts, because you won't be shading exactly the color that you pick. We'll talk about that a bit more on the shading part. Okay, let's then talk about shading. I use warm and cool colors. When I want my shadow to be warmer, I use warm colors. When my shadow to be cooler, I use cool colors. I use a multiply filter and I try to lower the opacity, and I try not to use the exact base color's darker version as the shading color, because 9 out of 10 times it doesn't look as good as if I just picked a different hue of the base color and then use the multiply filter and then use the shading on that. I use warmer shadows for cooler base colors and cooler shadows for warmer base colors if I don't have any scenario on mind, for example nighttime or like daytime. And as far as highlights go, I try to pick highlights by experimenting, because I don't know what to pick highlights on. Like, I am really bad at lighting and highlights. I don't know why. For rim lights and like the pure highlights, only the white ones, I can just do that, and I basically use white. But all the time I have to like try to experiment what goes on what, and what kind of highlights colors goes on what kind of base color or shadow color, and sometimes I don't know where to put the highlights, so it's my mistake on that. And whatever it works, it's just because I experimented on it. I don't know the exact process, unfortunately. So yeah, I can't advise you on anything on that. And as for the last part, final touches, I am very fond of a particular style. I came up with this based on like a lot of artists like I saw and admired. Oh, I like this artist, how this artist applied this effect, and I like how this artist draws this kind of things. I try to make my stuff inspired from a lot of other artists, which I don't think that takes away its originality, because after all, original stuff is basically made from like combination of the existing stuff. That's what I believe, at least. So what my final touches are is that I try to use noise as in my art to make it a bit retro. I sometimes use 3D type of filtering so that it looks kind of glitchy. I use sometimes the cropping techniques to make sure my compositions and the rule of like, I don't know what the exact rule is called, but it's with the cropping thingy. I don't know what it's called. So I try to follow that rule. I try to crop very good, so my composition looks good. I learned something that when you draw, sometimes less is actually more. You don't need too much details to express what you want to express. It's sometimes all about the form, shape, base color, and how you make that everything pop. And the most important thing, what I'm gonna say is I use the camera raw filter very much. That means I color grade my art after I draw everything. It helps in making sure all the colors are in the right place, because sometimes color grading makes all art come together for me. So yeah, that's basically what I draw, and I'm sorry if I did anything wrong.